So for those of you watching this video as it comes out, we have a new update live stream coming in just a couple of hours, most likely about 3 hours after this video goes live at 11 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, which means that we're going to get probably a ton of updates on how the first sort of couple of weeks are going to roll out and potentially some updates on the first season. But in this video, I want to talk about everything that we've kind of gotten an update on so far in the past few months and anything that we kind of know about the end game, how the game's going to roll out, for anyone that's looking for sort of a summary of what we got about Diablo 4 so far. So we're going to be going over everything that we currently know about Diablo 4 relatively quickly so that we can get the short and sweet of it. I'm going to have timestamps in the description down below, but the first thing I want to mention is what is Diablo 4? Because a lot of people still have no idea what they're getting into. Well, the basic description is it's a gear grinding ARPG with a limited open world. Limited meaning that you can only have potentially up to 12 players in your area in the open world. For example, in world bosses, this is much lower than your typical MMO with an open world. So that is what I would consider a limited open world. And what's really important is that there are seasonal mechanics inside the game. So if you wish to go ahead and play seasonally, your character will get reset roughly every 3 months. This is critical to know. However, if you wish to play casually and you don't necessarily care about the seasons, you can actually play on what's considered the Eternal Realm, which means that your character will be basically staying on there the entire time you play, won't get reset, and you'll be able to progress basically however much you want until the day you stop playing. However, if you're on the Eternal Realm, you won't be able to group with seasonal characters, hardcore seasonal characters, and you also won't potentially get access to these seasonal mechanics or the unique rewards associated with it. If you want access to those seasonal rewards, you're going to have to play the seasons and have a reset character every 3 months. So again, you can play Eternal Realm and never reset, but you will not get access to potentially a lot of the mechanics inside Diablo 4 per seasons. That's the basics. Let's dive into everything that we know so far. So let's talk about combat and the skill system inside the game. So combat's going to be your standard isometric / bird's eye view, mouse to click, and killing people with skills, killing monsters with skills. So if you wish to go ahead and have a WASD experience, you're not going to get that in this game, at least for the time being. Now you can bind your mouse button to another key on your keyboard to move, and I know this is pretty important because a lot of people hate this way of moving, but this is just core to Diablo 4. In terms of skills, you have a skill tree that you can follow. You're going to have a basic and a core skill on every single class. Your basic skill will be your generator typically across each of your class, or cost you 0 resources, whatever your unique resource is. Your core skill will consume your class resource and typically be your big payoff, and typically the skill that you're building your entire build around. Each class has 5 core skills, and that is kind of the focus of your entire build. Every skill after that is sort of a supporting mechanism for that core skill, usually utility, mobility, or some sort of defensive option. One other core component of the skill system is your ultimate ability. You have 6 abilities total, and one of them is your basic, one of them is your core skill, and then one of them is most likely going to be your ultimate skill, which is essentially a huge payoff that you can only choose one ultimate of in each class. So essentially you have 3 slots that are sort of that mix and match utility, and then 1 basic, 1 core skill based on what build you're running. This is sort of limited customization in terms of build running and sort of skill selection based on some other ARPGs. However, it is pretty engaging and I don't mind this at all. However, this is sort of what you got inside Diablo 4. One other thing about the combat and your skill system is you do have a potion key. Similar to every other ARPG out there, you're going to have a potion that you can collect orbs across the map and killing monsters, and you're going to use that potion to essentially just heal yourself up. Pretty core healing mechanic for every single class. Now, before we talk about anything else, we have to dive into the open world because it's Diablo 4's unique system, as well as being its underlying component of everything in the game. Now, the open world system is a forced online experience. You cannot play alone unless you're playing an instance-based piece of content. On top of that, it is not only forced online, it is essentially forced for those people that wish to min-max their characters, because it is coupled with the renown system. The renown system is a progression-based system in which you complete open world tasks or instance-based content to get points, to get skill points, Paragon points, potion charges, and potentially capping out or increasing the cap rather of your gambling material, your murmuring obols. This means that the open world is forced for anyone that wishes to min-max their character. You have to engage with it, meaning you have to traverse it, you have to interact with players potentially, and you have to find things around the map if you wish to progress your character to the maximum potential. Now, the different content around the map consists of Altars of Lilith, dungeons, cellars, side quests, open world events, world bosses, Helltide zones, which is more consistent with Endgame, and I'll go over that a little bit later, as well as Fields of Hatred, which is PvP, and I'll go over that later as well. All of these things are pretty core to be able to compete with the renown system and your endgame builds. Altars of Lilith are arguably the most important thing, along with dungeons in the open world. They are basically statues that you find around the map that give you permanent stat bonuses. Dungeons are instance-based content with an objective that you basically have seen in any other ARPG. Kill this, collect this, save these prisoners, etc. Finish it, kill a boss, get renown. Then you have your open world events, which are found basically just traversing the world, which you will engage with other players, and those other players will scale up the difficulty of these events. So keep in mind, if you're with someone, you're going to want to contribute because it is scaled up. Side quests, which you'll find just generally exploring the world and indicated by little blue markers. You're going to do whatever they ask. There is also the cellars, which are essentially mini dungeons where they have a smaller objective and are much, much shorter, although these ones don't actually contribute to your renown, as well as aren't really rewarding. So they have changed it a little bit, but I don't suspect that they're going to be a mainstay piece of content. And then, as I mentioned, you're going to have some endgame content like the Nightmare Dungeons, as well as the Helltide Zones, which I'll go over when we talk about the end game. Now, in the open world, you will have a mount to traverse it, but you will have to do the campaign to access that mount. The open world also has specific world tiers, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, these 4 world tiers are your overarching goal in Diablo 4. Each one scales up the difficulty and the amount of value you get from the open world and instance-based content. In World Tier 1 and 2, they unlock at level 1. You basically have the baseline game. World Tier 2 slightly increases the damage that the monsters are dealing, as well as your experience and some of your loot. On top of that, and World Tier 3 is when you unlock the endgame content. Helltide Zones and Nightmare Dungeons are unlocked at level 50, sort of, because the World Tier 3 is actually locked behind the campaign completion and a capstone dungeon scaled to level 50. That doesn't mean you have to be level 50, it just means that you have to be strong enough to beat a level 50 dungeon, which most likely means that you have to be roughly level 50. Now, what's important about this is that at level 50, if you can beat this dungeon, then you unlock basically everything the game has to offer. At the same time, in World Tier 3, you're going to get access to level 50 to level 70 loot ranges, and in those loot ranges, you can loot a level 70 piece of weapon or piece of gear and use it at level 50 because the level requirement is associated to your level, not the zone's level or the world tier level. The same thing applies to World Tier 4. You can beat the capstone dungeon earlier if you're strong enough and you get lucky, and you can get access to level 100 loot because that is the max level in this game. And you can use it at level 70 potentially, which is absolutely insane, okay? On top of that, you're also gonna get access to unique gear, literally unique gear, the classification, which has set aspects and set stats that you are guaranteed to get no matter what character you're playing on. Now, as I mentioned, in order to unlock those world tiers, you're going to have to do the campaign as well as the capstone dungeon. So we need to focus on the early game, and that is the campaign. So from level 1 to 50, we're going to be doing the campaign, which is indicated by a yellow quest marker around the map. And you're just going to be following that essentially through all the acts. During this time, my recommendation is to pick up a lot of different altars of Lilith and potentially complete some of the renown system in each of the maps, but you're definitely going to focus on the campaign in the early game. Again, this locks so many things behind it, meaning the mount system, the world tiers, a lot of the different content due to the world tiers, etc. Now, on top of that, we also have our class system mechanics within the first 25 levels, which will be indicated again by sort of a main story quest marker, but it's kind of a separate color so that you'll be able to kind of find that story, or rather the class mechanic quest, and finish that for your unique class mechanic. Some classes have it easier, some classes have it sooner. It depends on what class you're playing. Then we move into the mid game. Now, that early game process, based on some developer estimates, is going to take 35 to 80 hours, depending on how much you care or focus and troll, etc. But the mid game begins at level 50. Realistically, your end game content, the Helltide zones and the Nightmare dungeons, are going to be accessible at level 50, which means that we are going to be doing end game content at a lower difficulty as soon as we hit level 50. But when you hit level 50, you're going to get access to World Tier 3, so your grind is going to begin for that level 70 gear, and you're going to be trying to reach yourself towards that level 100, which is estimated to take roughly around 150 hours. And as soon as you hit level 100, that is when we access the end game. Now, the end game consists of two main parts: Helltide dungeons, or Helltide zones, and Nightmare dungeons. Helltide zones are open world pieces of content that are set times, set durations, and a localized area. These areas are going to have very difficult monsters in them, and when you kill those monsters, you're going to get unique resources to spend on slot specific chests for you to hopefully loot slot specific legendary items. This is a really nice way of specifically targeting your slots for specific legendary aspects and specific legendary stats, okay? So this is one of the main components of crafting your build. But once you've kind of crafted your build, the main end game is going to be Nightmare dungeons. Now, Nightmare dungeons scale. As I mentioned earlier, you can begin these at level 50. The way you access Nightmare dungeons is you complete various activities, potentially through the various open world events, or actually doing dungeons for Nightmare sigils. Nightmare sigils have a scaling effect, meaning when you complete one, you could potentially earn a higher tier one, and that is the end game grind. Now, these Nightmare dungeons have unique affixes that potentially give you unique mechanics, additional difficult parts of the dungeon. Monsters have unique stats or unique abilities, etc. We haven't seen all the different affixes that Diablo 4 has to offer, but we do have a few examples, such as the Helltide portals, which open up a bunch of monsters in the Nightmare dungeons. As I mentioned, you can add many affixes as you start to scale up to higher tier Nightmare dungeons, and that is going to be your end game grind once you reach level 100. This is a very core piece of the game because you're going to be repeating similar dungeons every single time. Now let's talk about the 4 artisans, as well as a few other core system mechanics for progressing your character. The first one is going to be the blacksmith. The blacksmith can craft weapons and armor. He can also upgrade your weapons and armor. This is going to upgrade to a certain point for permanent stats, and then you no longer can upgrade them. They're going to use typically ores or potentially salvaged materials. On top of that, we have the jeweler, which can craft amulets and rings. They can also upgrade jewelry, similar to the blacksmith, as well as upgrade your gems. Your gems there are 7 in the game, can scale in value and be socketed into your gear. We also have the alchemist. The alchemist can brew potions for temporary stat increasing, as well as temporary XP increasing, as well as increase your health potion viability, increasing its health regeneration and potentially just overall value there. Lastly, we have the most important one, which is the occultist. Now, the occultist is basically allows you to enchant your equipment, to modify stat rolls, as well as imprint and extract legendary aspects. Legendary aspects are the specific aspect that applies to any specific legendary item, and they usually have some sort of unique mechanic with it. When you extract it, you get a certain aspect that is allowed to be able to imprint on any rare or legendary gear. You can overwrite other legendary gear. However, as soon as you extract that legendary aspect and then imprinted it, you cannot extract it a second time. So it's very, very important to note that you can kind of want to be specific in where you're imprinting them. On top of that, we have the Codex of Power. The Codex of Power is sort of part of the occultist crafting system. By completing dungeons, you can unlock Codex of Power aspects, and you can just put them on any rare or legendary item over and over and over again because you've unlocked them permanently through the dungeons. This is a very, very core mechanic. On top of all of these artisan systems, we have a few other mechanics to talk about. First off, we have trading in the game. Now, trading is something that a lot of people have questions about, but essentially you cannot trade unique items. You cannot trade legendary gear. You can only trade gold as well as rare items. However, rare items can be nearly as good, if not better, than legendary items based on the stats that they roll due to you being able to imprint legendary aspects onto them. So trading still will be a core mechanic within Diablo 4. Now, we just talked about the occultist, and the occultist requires items to be able to use. So we're going to talk briefly about itemization. The stats of this game and the itemization can get really, really in depth. I'm not doing an in-depth video on itemization here. So to give you the basics, we have a helmet, torso, gloves, legs, and boots slot. We have 3 jewelry slots, amulet, and double ring, and then an assortment of weapons based on what class you're playing. Each aspect that you get only has a certain amount of gear that you can place it on. For example, your armor pieces cannot have offensive aspects on them. This is very, very crucial to note because based on what aspect you want, when you extract it, let's say it's a weapon, you extract it, it's an offensive aspect, you cannot imprint that aspect on a chest piece. This is very, very crucial to note in association with the occultist. Okay, you can also, as I mentioned, reroll those stats that you find. And typically with the itemization, what ends up happening is you have an assortment of rolls on rare gear and legendary gear, but with legendary gear, one of those rolls is replaced by the legendary aspect. So sometimes your rare gear can be better than your legendary gear. This is very, very crucial to note when you're entering into the game because you don't want to salvage rare gear all the time. In fact, rare gear can be some of your best in slot pieces, so don't just salvage it all the time. Now, one of the most essential endgame systems is the Paragon system, and this can go super in-depth as I mentioned, but to give you the basics and a quick summary here, the Paragon board is going to be divided up into certain types of runes. So these runes can be of different qualities: normal, magic, rare, legendary. Legendary runes are obviously going to be higher bonuses, bigger bonuses. Each Paragon board is only going to have 1 legendary rune, so that is going to be sort of the core mechanic and the Paragon board that you're going to want to pick based on your build. On top of that, the Paragon boards will have a glyph system. The glyph system allows you to socket in bonuses that have a radius. This radius will be encompassing certain runes, and based on those runes, you can actually increase the glyph. Now, you can pick multiple Paragon boards, but due to the glyph system, you actually could potentially get more value focusing on one Paragon board and really focusing on the radius of the glyph because you'll encompass additional runes, okay? This is very, very important to note and will be your Paragon system, or rather your endgame system, unlocking at level 50 and scaling all the way up to 100, and will really determine a lot of the builds inside of the game. Lastly, we have PvP. Now, PvP is going to be an absolute gank fest. There are fields of hatred in the open world, and when you enter them, you can fight players. In these zones, when you kill players, you're going to get a unique resource that you can spend on gear and unique cosmetics. The gear is not unique, but the cosmetics are. So if you care about that, you're going to want to grind some PvP. Now, the developers have alluded to, this is just an absolute meme fest where you can just fight whoever you want. So if you're a hardcore player, expect to be killed by a group of 4 normal players, and you're just going to be sad. So just keep that in mind. The PvP should be pretty fun, but it won't be controlled, and it'll just be there. So access it if you want, don't if you don't. And really quickly, I'll mention the 5 different classes. We have the Barbarian, Druid, Necromancer, Sorcerer, and Rogue. These classes all have their different unique mechanics and different playstyles. I have a full video talking about each of the classes, which I will leave a link to in the description down below, as well as leave a card right here for those of you that are interested in specifics about each class. So that pretty much wraps up all the core systems and the things you need to know, or everything that we know about Diablo 4. Now, if we wanted to get into the nitty gritty, the minutia of all the details, this video can go on for hours, right? But I wanted to give you the summary of what we all know in Diablo 4 so far. So if you guys are curious, or you potentially want to just get caught up in a relatively quick fashion, hopefully this video helped. If I'm missing anything that you felt was extremely important, because there might be something, if you guys think it's more important than I do, or potentially, maybe it requires more explanation, let me know in the comment section down below. And who knows, maybe I will go ahead and do an updated video for this when it comes closer to launch. Other than that, hopefully you all enjoy the server slam, and hopefully you enjoy the update live stream that we're going to get today. And after this video, well, we might get more information, so I'll have to update the video anyways. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.